This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Albert Woodfox, who was held in solitary confinement longer than any prisoner in U.S. history, has died at the age of 75 due to complications of COVID-19. The former Black Panther and political prisoner won his freedom 6 years ago after surviving nearly 44 years in solitary confinement. He helped establish the first chapter of the Black Panther Party at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola to address horrific conditions at the former cotton plantation. In 1972, he and a fellow imprisoned Panther, Herman Wallace, were falsely accused of stabbing prison guard Brent Miller to death. Woodfox and Wallace always maintained their innocence and said they were targeted for their organizing with the Black Panthers. Miller's own widow would later urge the state of Louisiana to free Albert Woodfox after she became convinced he was innocent. Woodfox, Wallace, and a third Black Panther, Robert King, were collectively known as the Angola Three. For decades, Amnesty International and other groups campaigned for their release. Robert King was freed in 2001. Herman Wallace was freed in 2013, only after a federal judge threatened to jail the warden of Angola prison if he refused to release him that day. Herman Wallace died 1 day after his release of liver cancer. But the state of Louisiana continued to refuse to release Albert Woodfox. He was eventually freed on his 69th birthday, February 19, 2016. 3 days after his release, Democracy Now!'s Renee Feltz and I interviewed Albert Woodfox in his first live TV interview. Albert Woodfox, can you talk about your plans today? You've walked out of the prison. You haven't been free in 45 years. What are you most struck by? What are your greatest challenges now, or your moments of joy since Friday?
For me, you know, as strange as it may sound, you know, when I was in prison, I had established who I was and ways to fight for what I believed in. Being released in society, I'm having to learn different techniques, you know, of how to, I'm just trying to learn how to be free. I've been locked up so long, and a prison within a prison. So for me, it's just about learning how to live as a free person and just take my time. Right now, the world is just speeding so fast for me, and I have to find a way to just slow it down and, you know, just enjoy my family. That's been a great source of energy, being able to sit down with King and laugh and touch him, and he touched me, and hug each other and stuff is, you know, grateful. He has been a man that ever since he walked out of prison, he has spent the last 15 or more years of his life fighting to get me and Herman out. And, you know, there are very few human beings who have shown the character and the strength and the determination as my friend and comrade Robert King. You know, the Black Panther Party may not exist, but we still exist. And we will continue to struggle to free some of our comrades and to, you know, just stand, you know, shoulder to shoulder and try to take on all of the injustice that we can that goes on in America every day.
Albert, it's so great to have you join us. Can you explain the significance of going to visit your mother's gravesite and why that was the first place that you wanted to go?
Well, when my mom passed away, I had made requests to go to her funeral and say my final goodbye. Warden Burr Kane denied that. request, and the same thing happened with my sister when she passed away. My family and friends had made arrangements to allow me to go and say goodbye. Again, Wardenborough can't deny that. So for some years now, there has always been this emptiness when it came, you know, to my mom and my sister, because I never had a chance to say that final goodbye. And so that's why it was important that one of my first acts of being free was to relieve that burden off of my soul.
That was Albert Woodfox speaking on Democracy Now!, February 22nd, 2016, 3 days after his release, after over 40 years in solitary confinement. Following his release, Albert would go on to spend years speaking out against solitary confinement while campaigning for the release of other political prisoners. He also wrote a remarkable memoir with Leslie George titled Solitary: Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. The memoir won an American Book Award and was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. In 2019, Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed Albert Woodfox in our New York studio after the publication of the book. And how do you feel today? How have you adjusted after 43 years in prison?
Well, hopeful. You know, Robin and I still travel around across America and outside of America to talk about solitary confinement, which we believe is the most horrible and brutal non-physical attack upon a human being by another human being. Throughout my 4 decades plus of solitary confinement, I've watched men go insane. I've watched men physically hurt themselves, you know, trying to deal with the pressure of being confined to a 9-by-6 cell, 23 hours out of every 24-hour period. And being free now, I still suffer, you know, claustrophobic attacks. I'm able to address them better now because my physical movement is beyond 9 feet now. And so, you know, I can walk in my house, I can go in the backyard of my house, I can go on the sidewalk, or there's a park, which I often visit a block and a half away from my house. So the only remedy for me when I had claustrophobic attacks was the space, you know. So this has made it easier to deal with those attacks. And
you write, gassing prisoners was the #1 response by security to deal with any prisoner at Angola who demanded to be treated with dignity. In the 70s, we were gassed so often every prisoner in CCR almost became immune to the tear gas. You were being gassed in solitary confinement. Yeah, well, you know, the sergeants were provided with these little, it's like a little deodorant can, you know. And if you would try to get a certain, like more toilet paper, or you complain about the toilet in your cell not working, you know, and if the officer didn't like the way you were talking, you know, or if you were trying to defend yourself for being handling a disrespectful man and stuff, you know, they would squirt the gas in your face, you know. And usually that would be followed by, they would come into your cell and beat you and handcuff you, and then bring you, put you in what's called a dungeon, you know.
In the book, you describe very graphically the situation at Angola when you first got there, before you were in solitary, and the rampant rapes that were occurring in the prison. And once you became politically conscious and you were returned there, you talk about how you insisted that on your in your section that there was going to be no more rapes. And talk about that and the impact that your political organizing had on the way you dealt with your fellow prisoners.
Well, the incident that started the prison chapter of the party to form anti-rape squads was, I was in my dormitory. I was housed in Hickory 4 at that time, and this young kid were assigned a bed across from me. And the saddest thing I've ever witnessed in my life is to look at another human being and see that his spirit has been shattered. You know, and this kid, you know, he was just sitting there, and I could see tears rolling out of his eyes, you know, and you know, I always have believed that in life, an individual or incident raises your level of consciousness. And so once your level of consciousness is raised, you become aware of whatever conditions, individuals, and so how you respond to that, you know, is pretty much determined on that level of consciousness. And I think at that moment that I said, I can no longer accept this. I can no longer tolerate this. So the next day I had a talk with Herman Wallace, and we had, you know, we used to go out on the football field. That's how we used to have our meetings. Like we were practicing football, throwing the football around and having political discussions and stuff. And so we discussed with the other members about, you know, the rape and slave trade that was going on in Angola. And so we decided to start providing protection for these kids coming in, to let them know that they had other options other than being made victims, you know.
How did you maintain your sanity? 44 years in solitary confinement.
Well, I think the fact that, you know, I was a member of the Black Panther Party, I had a political conscience, I had values and principles instilled by, you know, my mom that I grew into. You know, I didn't realize how much my mom had, you know, had set a foundation in me, even though I was resisting it. And, you know, over the decades, there were, you know, we had programs geared toward making the men better. We had schools. We used to hold schools and political classes, and you know, but, you know, as many battles as we won, as many men as we saved, as many men as we helped to keep their sanity, we lost, you know, twice as many men, you know, and, you know, there were times when, you know, I had to fight really hard for my own sanity, you know, and I think the fact that what I was doing, you know, throughout all this, I developed an unbelievable love for humanity and dedicated, you know, myself to doing whatever I could to better humanity. And so I remember reading something from Mr. Mandela, and he said, if a cause is noble, you can carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I thought what we were doing was a noble cause. So we were prepared, and so the beatings and the gassings and the decades of solitary confinement, you know, was really, although painful and difficult, it never got to the point where they were able to break us.
It's amazing to me that rather than just leaving it all behind, I mean, it already consumed so many decades of your life. You are spending your life free, talking about what's happening inside. I think, to say the least, it's impossible for anyone who hasn't gone through this to understand what it means to live in a 6 by 9 foot cell for more than 4 decades. How did you maintain your sanity? Describe for us being in that cell, what it felt like.
You know, well, actually, the measurements of the cell are 6 by 9, 6 feet wide, 9 feet long. But there is actually less space available because you have 2 bunks attached to the wall that takes up half of the cell, and you have a toilet bowl, face bowl combination on the back wall, and you have a iron table with a bench on the thing. So you have a very narrow pathway in which you can move back and forth in the cell. You know, when you first put in solitary confinement, you know, you go through this period where you want to scream, you know, because, you know, nothing you can do to fight this. Well, you know, in hindsight, I would say it was probably the earliest stages of claustrophobic. You know, and you know, but depending on the individual, as time goes on, you learn to control your emotions, your feeling of being smothered and being confined, and so you know. But then you know, we first put this in solitary confinement. You could only have like 2 or 3 pair of underwear and a T-shirt, and you know, you couldn't have books or radios or and those things. Those things were gained later as a result of resistance and organizing and hunger strikes and stuff like it. That we won the right to, you know, change.
Albert, you wrote, "My proudest achievement in all my years in solitary was teaching a man to read."
Yes.
How did you do that, and who was this man?
Well, his name's Charles, and we became good friends. And since, you know, my mom couldn't read or write anything but her name, you know, there's certain things, people that can't read or write, certain techniques they use and stuff. And so I picked this up on him. And, you know, the CCR, the cell block, is 15 men to a cell. And the uniqueness about, I guess, in Louisiana, the front of the bar cell is made out of bars. It's not a completely concrete enclosed cell. So I just asked him one day, I said, "Man, you know, don't get mad, but, you know, can you read or write, you know?" And he said, you know, "No, I can't." And I just told him, I said, "Well, I can help you learn how to read and write, but you got to really want it. You got to want this better than anything." And so I use a dictionary, starting off, you know, and dictionaries at the bottom of each page. There's a sound key on how you pronounce words as to how they spell, you know, and I taught him about, you know, vowels and adjectives and, you know, just basically, you know, and show him, you know, teach him how to shape words, and he really wanted it, you know, because I told him, I said that, you know, anytime, I don't care what night or day, you hit a wall, you call me. And he's called me 2 and 3 in the morning, you know. And I can't pronounce this word. So I would ask him to spell it. And then I'd remind him of, you know, the voice key at the bottom of the page and how you pronounce, you know, alphabets as, you know, and help him, you know.
He was in solitary, too.
Yeah, he was about 3 or 4 cells down from me.
How do you communicate? How did you communicate with other people in solitary?
Well, you talk, holler up and down the tier, you know. This is one of the ways I developed the habit of waking up in the very early, you know, a.m. because the tears stop showering. There's no noise, the doors are not opening and closing, and, you know, so you are able to really concentrate on what you're doing. So even now, you know, I wake up 3:30, you know, in the morning, you know, and this is when I do most of my reading. I still try to read at least 2 hours a day. So there's some things, habits that I develop in prison I still try to hold on to.
Your final thoughts as you go out into the world, as you travel the world, taking advantage of every moment in the free world?
Well, you know, my hope has always been, you know, for a better humanity, and to try to be a part of that, to try to say something or do something that will make, if no more than one human being, stop and think, and, you know, start a dialogue that can change into a movement. You know, I've always said that one individual can cause chaos, mass movements can cause change. So, you know, I still firmly believe in that. And so that's, you know, Robert and I and Herman, you know, we were in prison. The one thing we always noticed is that we didn't have a voice. And because of the men and women and children that were hid behind the walls of prison and in solitary, nobody knew what we looked like. So we had made a vow that we would be the voice of those men and women and children, and we would be the face. You know, I think what people in America and around the world have to realize, that prisoners don't come from another planet. They come from your family. They come from homes, and they might make mistakes. Usually the economic system brings the pressure. And, you know, I mean, I know that there's a very small percentage of human beings who do some horrible things, you know. But the overwhelming majority, you know, come with, you know, you come from a family. You don't come from an alien planet. And they need to, you know, remember that, and they need to love them and support them, you know, because prisons are any state institution, without oversight and without consequences, unchecked power corrupts. And that's the situation you have in prisons in this country.
Former Black Panther Albert Woodfox speaking on Democracy Now! In 2019, shortly after the publication of his award-winning book, Solitary, Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. He died Thursday of COVID at the age of 75. We'll speak to his loved ones after break.